Thanks for tuning in to The Leadership Beat, a Bates Communications original podcast series exploring leadership trends and inspiring leaders to innovate and think differently.
So in today's VUCA world, we're all facing challenges that have tested us as leaders. Business leaders, community leaders, political leaders, we're all looking for ways to navigate the uncertainty and the complexity of the road ahead. Here to offer us some of the lessons and wisdom that she's gained through more than a decade of civil service is Attorney General of Massachusetts, Maura Healey. I first had the opportunity to meet with Maura a couple of years ago, and the first thing that struck me was how intently she listens. Regardless of how fast-paced or demanding the environment might be, Maura has a knack for connecting with others, sticking to her guns, and pushing for change, something many leaders are struggling with in today's environment. So what has influenced Maura's approach to leadership, and what advice would she give others? Please join me in welcoming her to find out. Maura, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Laura.
So before we dive into some of the challenges that perhaps you're facing today, let's just go back a little bit and touch on your roots. So you've said, I've heard you speak, and you've talked about your family and how those values are really important to you today. So can you share a story about your upbringing that illustrates that?
Yeah, so I grew up as the oldest of five in a small town in New Hampshire. And, growing up, both of my parents were really involved in community. My dad was a selectman. My mom was a school nurse. They were both involved in a lot of organizations. And I think I sort of saw what it meant to be engaged in the civic life right around you and the way you can contribute. And I think that influenced my drive ultimately for public service. The other thing that I noticed too is that my mother in particular, whenever there was a need for something, she would step in. She would, when I said I wanted to be a brownie and there was no brownie troop in my town, my mom started one. When there was no historical society, my mom started one. It was just like she took the initiative. She was never in elected office, but I saw more leadership out of my mom than anyone else. And she also, I think, found a way to make sure that my four brothers and sisters and I were working as a team, supporting one another. Yes, we would fight, but I think, that value of teamwork and of paying attention to your own, of course, family and siblings, but your community is something that really stayed with me.
Well, it's evident in, how you've approached kind of the work you do. But let's talk about what you did after high school. So you went to Harvard, you went on to Northeastern to study law, but there was a little intermission that you had in there. So talk about what happened during those 2 years and what influenced your life about those years.
Yes. So Laura, when I graduated from Harvard, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I had an opportunity to go play professional basketball in a European league. And that sounded like a great thing for me to do. I was 21 years old. I had done some on-campus interviews with investment banks and other major companies, but it just didn't feel quite right to me. And so I took this opportunity and I moved to Salzburg, Austria, and lived there for a couple of years and played. And it really was one of the best things I think I could have done. It opened my eyes up to the world. It was the early 90s, and that was when the former Yugoslavia was breaking apart. And literally I saw refugees fleeing into Austria and Hungary from that war-torn area. I learned a lot living in Europe about diversity. There were definitely experiences there that called to mind some of what I read about in the history books in terms of the dynamics between and among nations there. And, it just, in part, I think it's ultimately what led me back to law school because, you sort of saw people fighting for rights and newfound freedoms. I got to go to the Soviet Union when I was there. And, at that time, of course, it was in the early days of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And again, people sort of trying to establish themselves and find new freedoms. And, that made me think about the rule of law, Constitution, and those things. And, it definitely, I think, contributed to my view that I wanted to go to law school. And that was really helpful. And for a small town kid from New Hampshire, I think it was a really, who it wasn't like my parents gave me a credit card and I could get a Eurail pass and travel all over. That wasn't in the cards for me. But this was a way to have that sort of experience. And I think I grew a lot as a result. And, I used to get back there to ski once in a while. I don't do that as much anymore, but I have a lot of dear friends from that time.
Well, so talk a little bit about, obviously, the exposure it gave you to being in that area and seeing some of the things but you were also there playing basketball. And so being part of a team in itself brings some unique experiences. So what was it about, being part of an athletic team that maybe also shaped your style and how you view the world?
So I'm a point guard, and a point guard is sort of like the quarterback on the basketball team. Kind of bossy, you're running the show, the ball's in your hands. I probably earned that, and learned it at an early age as the oldest of 5, our own little bitty basketball team in my family. But, I think that basketball, one of the things I really like about it is it's such a team game. And everybody's got a different role to play. Somebody's a really great shooter, somebody's a great rebounder or defender. Everything and everyone has got to be working together, though, to be successful. And, that's why LeBron James doesn't win it every year. It's why, Kobe Bryant didn't win it every year, right? It's about teamwork. And I think that you learn in basketball about teamwork. You learn about practice, setting goals, discipline. You learn about failure and how to deal with failure. You learn about goals. And I think that if it weren't for athletics, I'd never be in the position I am today. I certainly would never have run for, I'm an elected official, I'm an attorney general in political office. I don't think I would have been successful in my campaign or successful in the office were it not for a lot of the things that I learned playing sports. And I think for women, Laura, in particular, sports are really helpful. Studies show how sports can help build girls' esteem and confidence. And it's certainly not limited to sports, and there are all other sorts of endeavors people can engage in. But it's just to say, it's not surprising to me when you look at, C-suites, when you look at boards, when you look at heads of organizations or senior management, you see women, many of whom probably played a college sport. And I think those things are connected.
Yeah, well, I tend to agree. Having been a college athlete myself, I can prescribe to how much that has shaped who I am today.
I'm sure. What did you play?
I played lacrosse and field hockey.
Oh, lacrosse is a game I wish I had played. When I was playing basketball at Harvard, the lacrosse coach then approached me about playing lacrosse in the spring, and I was all basketball all the time. I said no. And of course, 2 years later, they went on to win a national championship. So I always regret not playing lacrosse.
Well, so talk to me a little bit. Obviously, you've had all these experiences that have shaped your life, whether it was, your family roots and what you learned from your parents, your education, traveling, and being on, a sports team. But how would you say your leadership style and philosophy has evolved today? How would you describe it? And what do you think influenced it most?
Well, I think there are a few things that influenced me. I think that from an early age, I had a strong mother, a mother who had sort of a vision for things. Sometimes we kid and say she engaged in magical thinking, right? As if she could will certain things to happen. I think that has its dangers, but I think it also has its positive attributes in that, she could sort of talk about and articulate a vision. And, I think that's part of my leadership style. I tend to be more the equivalent of let's go to the moon and get it done, right? Let's, here's what we should do. And we'll figure out how to get there, but this is what needs to happen. And I think that comes in part from my mother. I think that, through athletics, and I was a serious athlete, I have a style that is about teamwork. I am the boss, and I'm the boss of my 600-person organization. But I really know that I am only as good as my team. And my team is what drives the work and delivers the results here for the people of Massachusetts. But, I think that's important to recognize as a leader that you have to support those who are doing the work and find ways to empower them and for them to grow professionally. I think I also have a more I would say, conciliatory approach as a leader. I'm a little bit more, let's get around the table and talk and try to build some consensus around things. And again, I think that probably comes from growing up in a boisterous Irish family where, you found yourself in the role of having to mediate and navigate, family disputes and issues. But I think that's been effective. And finally, I would say I'm sort of, I think, known for a willingness to take on some of the tough issues in the face of criticism. I mean, enforcing our gun laws here, led to a lot of pretty vicious attacks against me. Our decision to sue Exxon, for its role in the climate crisis, was subject to criticism from some. But I think for me, my leadership style has been in the same way, step out on the court, see what you can do. Don't be afraid and don't back down. I think that's carried over into this sphere where you have to be willing, provided you've done the homework, and you've practiced and you've got your ducks in a row, that you're ready to go and just feel confident in what got you to this point.
Well, so something you just mentioned about teamwork and surrounding yourself with folks and supporting them. So I want to just dig into that a little bit. So what is the secret to helping people around you? How do you support and empower your team so that they can do their best work?
I think this is really hard for some of us to do, particularly those of us who are used to taking on and carrying so much responsibility. And what is really important, I think, is to do a few things. The first thing is find opportunities to give them a platform, right? Whether it's to attend the conference or speak on the panel or write the article for a trade journal or a business journal instead of you, right? I mean, find the opportunity to actually put that person forward and give them a platform. Nomination to committees or commissions, put your people out there. I think the other thing is to give them a pat on the back and to provide encouragement and opportunities for them to explore their own personal and professional growth. I know when people have approached me in the office on my team, I've been very receptive to their desire to try out a different area of practice, or sometimes even to leave the office. I've had people who've left the office in return, but have gained great experience in between. And I think, as a leader, giving your people a platform, but then also, encouraging them to be focused on these things. Because I think sometimes employees think that there's something selfish or wrong if they focus too much on themselves, that their boss or their managers don't want to see that. I actually see that as a really good sign that somebody is focused on what's working for them, what isn't working for them, because you're going to do your best work if you're most passionate about something. The other thing that I think is increasingly important is wellness. We formed a wellness committee last year. It is incredibly active. We hold regular programming and convenings. Employees right now, I think everywhere, are under such stress, strain, anxiety, particularly through COVID. We've seen some of that. It is true, too, that in my profession as a lawyer, we suffer higher rates of substance use disorder, alcoholism, and the like. And so wellness is something that I think workplaces need to pay attention to, because your people are your most valuable resource and asset, and wellness needs to be built in as a component, not just a sort of fluff, looks good on paper exercise. We're going to have one because everyone's got one. This is the new fad. But no, really internalized and operationalized within your organization, because I think it goes directly to the health of your organization and frankly, to your bottom line.
So how do you do that? How do you incorporate wellness into your routine?
Well, we've made it, within the office, we've made it an actual, committee. There are regular participation by regular senior management on it, showing that this is something that we really value as an organization. And, for me personally, I think that, it's trying to find outlets. For me, it's exercise or spending time with my nieces or nephew or friends. I really like to get outdoors and be in nature. it's not easy, and you can't measure it day to day. There's some people who I know who are very, very disciplined. I'm not one of those people. The nature of my job doesn't help necessarily, because there could be some crisis breaking at any given time that we have to respond to, or calls from the media, or something happen nationally that we have to get into court on. But you try to do the best you can. Sleep, many have written about sleep. I still am not sleeping enough, but I know that if there's one single thing I could do, it would be that we all could do probably, is to make sure we are getting more sleep.
So true, so true. So that's a good segue to, I mean, the environment that we're in right now. I mean, it's hard to kind of avoid that we find ourselves in this period of turmoil and conflict, and change is literally happening in every industry, every sector. No one is untouched. So what do you recommend to other leaders who need to reach across this proverbial aisle and really partner to get work done?
I think that whether you're in government as a leader, whether you're in the nonprofit world or in the business community, I think as a practical matter, we are not going to solve today's problems without all elements working together. And so my advice, I think, to all of us is to try to rise above some of the fray. I mean, I know from where I sit, the media will spend a lot of time analyzing the work of offices like mine or politicians, and they do enjoy creating sometimes a frenzy, or creating a race, or creating an issue. And if you pay too much attention to that, you're going to miss the opportunity to actually get things done. And so I think those who can reach out to people, reaching out to a variety of stakeholders. I think the worst leaders are those who are insular, who don't look outside, who don't listen to others. I think that's really important for everyone to be doing right now. I think the second thing is to recognize and reaffirm, within yourselves that, yes, I have my view and experience, but this person who I'm engaging with has their view born of their own experience. It doesn't make one better or worse necessarily. It makes it different. And to bridge those differences, you really have to practice empathy in the true sense of the word, and try to put yourself in the shoes of another person. And so, I do that with my legislature. I do that with my governor. I do that with various stakeholders that come before my office. You're constantly trying to understand, and then with that understanding, you can find then the areas of commonality, right, to then go after. And I think that's how we really need to, I think we've gotten away from that as a society. And speaking, we talked about team sports a little while ago. One of the bad things, and I live in Boston, a crazy sports town, right? I mean, we love our sports and we love our sports teams, but I think America and our culture in general, it's a little too much like we treat everything like a team sport, like everything's win or lose or zero sum. You get, into camps immediately, right? And, there's no place for that, I think, in public policy making. And really, there should be far less of it in politics.
Well, so let's, with the backdrop of this political environment, but then you've also got the global pandemic, you've got the racial injustice and the social justice issues that are top of the conversation. And that leads to decisions and problems needing to be made, but it's happening at a faster, frenetic pace, right, than ever before. So what helps you stay focused and motivated when things are moving quickly? There's so many problems to try to tackle. What keeps your eye on the ball?
I think it's just thinking about the people whose lives we impact and touch through our action. And that always inspires me. I am privileged to be in a position where I can make things happen, and my team can make things happen. When one of our local communities, disproportionately Latino and low income, was running out of food during the COVID pandemic, we were able to make it happen. So they had better access to food and housing and also testing. And, I think about those people. I think about, there's a woman who's a hero of mine who runs a local community organization in that very community of Chelsea, Massachusetts. And, she's not an elected official, but she is the leader of that community. And I think about, if Gladys Vega can figure out a way to get food and diapers and secure housing, for a few thousand people, basically at a moment's notice over a weekend, then, think about what we can do, right, and should do. And so I think it's a lot of times finding inspiration in those around me. I know that through the last couple of years, the young people who've come forward, who'd marched to end gun violence, who marched for a better climate, who've been out there speaking out against injustice, who've been speaking up for Black Lives Matter. I find these young people really amazing. I mean, the LGBTQ kids, speaking up, unafraid, or maybe afraid, but nevertheless speaking up. That's where I think I draw a lot of inspiration from, because you look at them and you're like, boy, if they're doing it, I know what I got to do, and I certainly, have the energy to do it.
Well, so you have overcome some adversity in your life, and obviously resilience has gotten you to the place where you are today. So, what has helped you stay true to that vision on what you're trying to accomplish despite the barriers?
Well, I think it's staying true to what I ran on, which was to be the people's lawyer and to be there as an advocate for people, particularly those who are vulnerable or who can't hire, the high-priced lawyers and lobbyists to help them. And so, for me, that is an aspect of the job that I really love, being able to be there as an office for people, whether it's helping with their opioid addiction or going after some of the drug companies that contributed to and brought about this whole opioid crisis, helping a survivor of human trafficking, working to make healthcare accessible and affordable, working to protect the rights of students, right, who are just mired in debt right now, workers, for safety in the workplace, consumers, seniors, that's what I keep my focus on. And again, it goes back to the individual stories. For me, what makes me happy as a boss and as a leader is when I get a letter from a constituent who is thanking, the woman that she spoke with in our charities division who helped her navigate some legal issue, or, the student who called in and say, hey, I got ripped off by this loan servicer. Your team, so-and-so helped me get a $10,000 discharged from my student loan, right? It's like, those are constantly, they're affirming and reaffirming in terms of, making sure that I'm paying attention and trying to stay true to who I promised to be.
So, some of our listeners are business leaders, and how would you kind of apply some of that advice to, CEOs of companies or executives who are trying to navigate through, managing their business, supporting their team members, still staying true to, supporting the economy? Anything that you have learned that you would share with those business leaders about leadership?
Well, I think, you're not a leader if you don't have people with you and people following. So the first thing is, you've got to kind of have a team mentality. You've got to know where people stand. You've got to know what their concerns are. And then I think you build trust that way with your employees when you show genuine empathy. Not feel good, we're going to have a single town hall and now we've addressed systemic racism in all its forms. No, I mean, knowing your people. I think that really matters, and it really helps engender trust, and I think loyalty and more commitment to the agenda of your organization. So that I think is really important. I also think that it's important that you surround yourself with people who have different perspectives and opinions. It does us no good if we have an idea and everybody yeses us. And I really appreciate the person who speaks up and says, you know what, Maura, you're wrong. That's not right. You need to think about it like this. And there are too few people like that, probably within our organizations. That's so important. People who can challenge us, because sometimes we get enamored of our own ideas and our own voices. And, we need to be reminded it takes trust, and you've got to establish that really quickly with your team that, look, you can be critical. I want you to feel comfortable saying whatever you need to say to me, because that's going to make me better. It's going to make our organization better. I think that's something that's important. And then, I also think reaching out to others. I know I had conversations with other leaders, because there's just some things that only, another attorney general can actually understand, right? And I think finding some camaraderie there, just so you can commiserate from time to time or ask advice on how you might handle something is really important too.
That's great. And, one of the things that you've mentioned is that some of what you do focus on, and being the people's lawyer, you do sometimes have the perhaps unenviable position of being lonely at the top. So when you're in a position of having to advocate for something that you really believe in, that maybe not everyone's on board with, some of our listeners may not be in politics, they're in corporate leadership positions, but they run into this as well. So what would you share about how you influence those naysayers when you're trying to get things done, and how do you really keep your conviction when you're surrounded by that?
Yeah, I mean, first you try to get it right? If you're making a decision on where you're going to open a new plant or facility, or how you're going to go about it, a necessary reduction in force, or in my instance, whether or not I'm going to file a particular lawsuit or launch an investigation, I think the key is, make sure that you've done your homework, right? So that you're going to make the best call you can make in your best judgment. I feel comfortable doing that if I feel like I've heard everybody out, I've read everything, I've asked the questions. We just got to make a decision. And then that helps me feel better about things. And then that helps me in the face of naysayers, who I always start with the listen first, what is it that they're concerned about? And then you have to decide too. There are some people you're never going to convince, right? I mean, I see it in my business. There are some people that I am just never going to convince, and I'm just going to choose to ignore and not waste time with. But there are a lot of people who you can bring along by listening and then explaining where you were coming from and how you arrived at this decision. And I think that's just generally important as a matter of communication, something I still need to work on at times. It's, I think people will go where you want them to go. They got to know the rules of the road and how you got there, and what that's about. And you also, when it comes to naysayers, just have to be willing to stand in and recognize that that's part of life, and that's the price and the privilege of leadership too, to take the hits.
Well, Maura, thank you. You've given us so much to think about, to work with. Any closing thoughts you'd have if you were giving advice to the business leaders out there as we move into what is the new normal, the new reality? What do we need to see from our community to really help us all thrive?
I think we've got to understand that we're never going to be about rebuilding. This is instead about building in new and different ways. I think that the coronavirus has exposed new ways of thinking about how we work, how we go to school, how we vote, even transportation, it's deliver healthcare. It's exposed a lot of opportunity in that sense. And so I think you've got to welcome innovation within your ranks and within your organization. I, for example, never would have imagined that we would be doing so well in a virtual environment. It has certainly changed going forward how I think about telecommuting, for example, or other work arrangements. So I think be open to that, be flexible. The other thing is recognize that I think we are in a time where for 450 years in this country, we have not dealt with systemic racism. And the vestiges of that in how pervasive it is across all aspects of civic society. I think within the business community, no need to be defensive about that. We all have to engage, and we all have a role to play in building new ways of doing things that rid us of some of the disparities and injustices that are out there. And so, I say that because I don't think this is just a moment. I think this is where, we need this reckoning and engagement in government, in the business community, across the board. It'll make us healthier and better as a society when we treat one another with the dignity and respect that every human being, regardless of race or identity or sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, ability should be afforded.
Well, so what I've heard from you is empathy, engagement, inclusiveness. Those are leadership traits that everyone can model, and it certainly worked out well for you. Thank you, Maura. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Laura, and good luck to everybody out there. These are hard times, but I have a lot of hope.